thinking again about that gathering in Bethany, a short distance outside Jerusalem. I was reminded of occasions in the past when there were funerals in the villages where I was minister in Zambia. Someone has died, and so the family is called. In the past, most of the family would have lived nearby, in the nearby villages and in the same village. Today, families spread around the country. They're in the Copper Belt, they're in the capital, Lusaka. They're in other places involved with government administration. They're doing different things which have taken them across the country. They get the message. And within days, the family has gathered. Sometimes it seemed to me that it was the only reason that Zambia had a bus service, because so many people always travelling to funerals. To go and be with the family, to give comfort to those who were nearest and dearest to the one who had died, to go and witness and remember that person. And while we were waiting for the family to arrive, the church choir, members of the church would gather each night at the house. The custom was that usually the women would be inside where the body was. Although in the town where I was latterly, the body would be kept refrigerated in a mortuary. The women would be inside and the men outside. The furniture was all cleared from the house, so the women had to sit on the floor. And the men sat in the armchairs, out in the open, so long as it wasn't the rainy season. Whatever the traditions and customs that we might think have been antiquated, this was the scene for God's work to be done. The choir would be there and they would sing. And through their singing, this was their intention, would bring comfort to the family. And on so many, many occasions, we would hear from someone who had been mourning for their loved one at some time. That was the time when I felt the closeness of God, when I felt the love of God surrounding me through the love of those people in the church who came. There was no pressure, no forcing, no power evangelism, except God's power. God's Spirit was at work. And people, through the songs, were listening to God's Word, readings from the Bible, and things that people would say, the quiet of the evening, would bring through the mourning, through the suffering of those people and that family, sense of new life, and that sense of assurance that the one who had died would live forever. Now go back to the time before the resurrection of Jesus, on which we base this hope, this confidence. And here we are in Bethany. Mary and Martha, two of the closest friends of Jesus. We meet them on several occasions through the Gospels. Two of his closest friends are mourning the loss, the death of their brother Lazarus. What do we read about this? Some surprising things happening. Jesus gets the message, and it must have taken a day or so to get to him. He gets the message, but he doesn't move immediately. Next verse we read, he stayed on for 2 more days. What was he doing? What was he so busy with that he had to stay? That he couldn't go straight away and be there with those sisters? 2 days he waited. He had heard that Lazarus was gravely ill. Not that he died. And as he communed with the Father, as he prayed, as he listened, those 2 days, tremendous spiritual power was moving. For one thing, he knew very clearly, though nobody told him, that Lazarus had died. He tried to put it calmly and gently to the disciples, for whom also this family was much loved. Lazarus has fallen asleep. It's the way that many people say, just to lessen the impact of those words of he has died. It's the way that we often speak today. May he rest in peace. He has passed away. And the disciples misheard what Jesus said. And he had to put it plainly to them. Our friend Lazarus has died. Must have been more astonishing for them that Jesus hadn't moved immediately he'd been told in the first place. But then they were all thinking what would happen. To go to Bethany, Jesus had to return to Judea, very close to Jerusalem, where they knew they would have much opposition. They knew it was dangerous to go. And if Jesus went to Bethany, he'd be found. And so they're in 2 minds. Jesus, it's dangerous to go there. Do you think it's okay? Do you think it's all right to go? Thomas, giving in to, okay, let's all go and die with him. Almost trying to make a joke out of it, but knowing the seriousness of the matter and realizing perhaps why Jesus had needed to take so much time preparing himself for that journey. When he got there, of course, everyone was in mourning. It was true. Lazarus, Martha and Mary's brother, in effect Jesus' brother too. He was very much part of that family because of all that they had been through together. Lazarus had died. Martha came out to try and prepare Jesus for the shop, but Jesus already knew. And then she went back to find Mary. And they came together, and Jesus got all kinds of messages from around. People scorning and saying, why wasn't he here? If he'd come much earlier. He knew, we sent the message. If he'd come, he could have saved Lazarus from dying. As we realise, as it turns out, we know Jesus had been preparing himself not just for the dangers of going to Bethany near Jerusalem, but preparing himself for one of those final acts, this tremendous miracle that was to take place. Preparing himself and preparing so that the people could be ready too and have some understanding of what he was doing, who he was. Further, not long after, to have some understanding of what was going to happen to Jesus himself. So he went down to the tomb with a promise that they would see God's glory. Didn't I tell you, Mary, that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? Well, she was clinging to that faith and struggling with it and hoping. But still, when he went to the tomb and ordered them to move the stone away, among so many signs of what was going to happen later on for him. When he ordered them to move the stone aside, he said, no, surely not. You can't open a tomb, especially not such a short time after someone's died. It was weeks, months when the body had dried out. When someone else in the family died, perhaps. But not yet. There'd be such a bad smell. The smell of death. And with the stone aside. And then he shouted. It's hard to do when you're standing reading the Bible. Hearing the words as they really were. Lazarus, come out! It's not like the student who's not sure of the grammar of the sentence he's about to say in an English class. He says, sorry, I can't hear you. This was confident. This was sure, it was certain. There was nothing wrong here, no mistake. Lazarus came out. You've got the picture, kind of stylized picture on the front of the order of service, which I pick up from my set of Christian clip art. You've got the picture. It hasn't actually got the binding round his face. It's as if he's coming out, you can see already. He couldn't see. He could hardly walk, of course. His hands, his arms were bound. came out. Untie him. How would you feel? You're there in the crowd. You know for certain that Lazarus had died. And this happens. So, many more of those who've been skeptical about Jesus, many more of those who had been caused to criticize things he'd said and done in the past, among them Pharisees, perhaps some who had gathered even at that time, preparing to arrest Jesus, turned to Jesus, recognizing in him God at work among them, and being prepared through this greatest of the miracles, being prepared for that time not long after when Jesus himself would be placed in a tomb. And the stone would be rolled away. When Mary, was it this same Mary, would be the first to meet him there in the garden, plain for all to see, made plain for her, and then for the disciples, then for 500 others. We'd see Jesus risen from the dead. Not just that in him had been the power to raise Lazarus from the dead, but among them, in their midst, the power of God was at work. And Jesus rose from the dead. So take time during the coming week as part of your Lenten discipline, perhaps. Read through this story again and see all the connections that there are as we prepare for the events of Good Friday and Easter. Look and be awestruck at how much of those events is written into the story of Lazarus too. How much Jesus had done to prepare for that occasion. And be ready. Be ready when once again, on Easter Sunday, we find the stone rolled aside, the tomb emptied, the one who was buried alive for all of us.